Hey, what's up, listeners and watchers of Insiders of Omaha podcast? Here you go, Tyson Compton with you, bringing you another stellar conversation with a client of mine, past client of mine, bought a house a few years ago, a beautiful family. His name is Cuddy, and he is bringing light and revolutionizing Omaha space in the tech startup with Move Capital. And they do an exceptional job of bringing life to ideas of local Nebraskans trying to get in the tech space and providing education and awareness, as well as building out a pathway for success. I can't wait for you to check out this podcast. Just know that this whole podcast is funded by myself and my partner, Christian Morrison. And we just want to bring you guys great value, great conversations to help you learn, understand, and know what's going on in Omaha and who's doing all the work. Thank you so much for checking in. Please like and subscribe on the button below. And we look forward to your feedback on this podcast and many more to come. Have a great day, guys. So you just came for a big meeting this morning.
Yep.
What was that? Was that work related?
Yeah. So, I mean, we do a couple things in the community that are kind of cool. So on Thursday mornings, we do an event called Startup Stand Up.
Okay.
So one of the things that we've seen in, starting a company is really kind of lonely, not really know what questions to ask, especially if you're by yourself or maybe have two people. And so started doing a startup stand-up where it's just a Zoom, just like you would in a normal large company or startup, where you can go through and kind of say what you're working on, what you're struggling with, see if anyone in the group has any ways to kind of break through. And so we had people from
like Startups Anonymous. Hey, I'm here. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm having trouble. Yeah.
Well, how can you help me?
Yeah.
But it's just great. We had, a handful from Omaha, some from Lincoln, some from Aurora, Nebraska.
Nice.
Able to just kind of get together quick for.
Sweet. Did you get that idea locally or organically, or did you see some other people across the country doing that? Or
it's one thing that kind of just came to us as we're kind of finding gaps in the ecosystem and figuring out ways we can build community.
Well, it probably also opens up opportunities for you guys where maybe you guys can step in with your seed capital or pre-seed capital. Right?
100%.
Yeah.
So we have two things going on. I started in January. So we have,
because we're at a year, man.
I know.
I texted you congratulations about a year ago or a little, about 11 months ago. I saw you guys at the Commons.
Yeah.
And I was like, I wanted to get down there for that. Couldn't get down there. I was like, hey, congratulations on the new venture. And now we have that, and then so we got two buckets.
So I have we launched a venture capital fund.
Yep.
So I'm managing partner of a pre-seed fund where we actually do capital into startups.
Yeah.
But I also launched a nonprofit in parallel called the Nebraska Startup Academy.
Okay. Yes.
To provide support, community kind of engagement, but also just some curriculum. A lot of this stuff startups read about online is really coastal focused, and it's very different to build a company in the Midwest.
So talk about that maybe. And, a lot of our news on the larger scale of economics comes from coasts or maybe our bigger business hubs. And now we're here in the Midwest where it's a little bit more of a nuanced comparatively. What is the difference in that?
I mean, there's a couple things that really kind of stand out. I mean, just that we never really like to sit here and talk cost of living when we're talking startups, but it's so true in terms of like what you need to raise to get started. So, you read on Crunchbase, I need to raise 1.5 million before I can even start. And then you're like, here in Nebraska, you can go pretty far with like 100K.
Wow.
Or,
interesting.
250K because it's not, there's a lot of places to work. There's people are willing to
open and free, open source spaces.
Ton of spaces. Yeah.
Doors are, whereas I would imagine just contacting certain people is way easier.
Yep.
There's less gatekeepers. Wow, it's interesting.
And Nebraska actually has it's been around for almost a decade now, but a prototype grant program through the Department of Economic Development is just phenomenal as well. So
is that the Corn Talks program?
It was a program that got passed, I want to say like 10 or 11 years ago, but it's specific for prototype grant development, and the state will match funding up to like about 150K to launch a startup. Like
a friend of mine just applied for that, Leash. So Marty's been on before speaking, and he's a good friend of mine, neighbor. But he's talked a little bit, so he kind of we have some interest in this podcast, I'm sure. Marty, if you're listening, we love you. So that's super cool. I feel like this space is still largely unknown in not only Omaha, but Omaha's way more advanced than, like, let's say Kearney or Scotts Bluff. But just in the Midwest, you're just not. We're used to brick and mortar. We're used to ag, education, healthcare, maybe throwing in some financial sector stuff. But I mean, Omaha in the Midwest has really grown on the digital and tech space, no?
Yeah, it really has. And COVID kind of ended up being a little bit of an accelerant there.
Okay. Yeah, a little incubator almost, like for 18 months.
Well, and it was, people in Silicon Valley who were investing in the space would basically never have to leave their neighborhood. So if you wanted to talk to them, you had to move out there or you had to go have those conversations. Yeah. I mean, the accelerator I was working at, when they would launch, they would have, a 16-week program. And if you weren't living in Silicon Valley, you had to fly out every week to do their weekly event. Mm-hmm. Well, and then once, COVID happened, they decided, hey, we'll do some of these remote. Let's see how it works. And they were able to figure out, hey, a lot more people are able to participate. Things are actually happening. Able to happen there. So
the only thing that comes to mind, like I'm thinking about social network, and I just remember Zuckerberg moving out to Silicon Valley and Palo Alto in this janky old ranch with everybody just coding all night long, and then like in their like team meeting was wrecking the chimney off into the pool. But I don't think that's necessarily what we're talking about here, folks. So bear with us. But on the professional side, there's a lot of barriers being broken down, stereotypes being broken of what's going on, and I mean, people that are born, raised, and growing here that are really leading the charge in this, and you guys being one with Move. Now, tell us a little bit about where you saw the opportunity for inserting yourself into this in the market there.
Yeah, so we play really early in the space. We're talking like we make investments. People have like a paying customer or two.
Rich uncle.
Yep.
Mom and dad, buddy.
Yep.
Who's going to take a flyer.
Right.
Yeah.
And so one of the big gaps that we saw is not everybody has a rich uncle or a buddy, but they have great ideas and they have talents that they. So Nebraska historically we have great performance from like our seed stage in A. So like the Nebraska Angels have been instrumental. Corporations like Nelnet have done a great job. Invest Nebraska has kind of been above and beyond as a state-run investment fund. But in those stages, the way that we historically de-risk anything kind of in the Midwest is a risk-adverse kind of mindset. Is show me the traction. So proof of concept. Where's it at? Which is great once those companies can hit $5,000 a month in revenue. They've built this on a solid foundation, and we like it. But there's a huge gap before that where some great ideas, maybe without a little bit of risk capital, that could really kind of push them to the next stage. So
they need some of that juice behind them.
Yeah.
And I think about how many people, if they didn't know about something like this, never even get off the ground. It just never leaves their living room, never leaves their entertainment, never leaves a bar top, whatever. Interesting. So you guys, now let's back up again. I'm sure you've been on other podcasts, but one thing that's beautiful about the atmosphere right now in the stage is I'm hosting a podcast where I get to have past clients or current clients come on because I meet such interesting people in real estate, and I love their story. And Charlie is no different. And Charlie used to be a school teacher.
Yeah.
I mean, not that long ago. Like we're talking like 5 years.
Yeah, 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the accelerant here, you were teaching high school math.
Yep.
To,
juniors in high school.
And now you are a VC co-founder for helping Nebraska's digital landscape grow like crazy.
Yeah.
So talk me through who that Charlie was and who this Charlie is, because they're not the same, right? I mean, there's definitely growth.
Yeah, there's been pieces. I mean, there's so many things that you learn in a classroom that can be applied, which I think actually helped more than I would have thought. I talk with my partner often, like, man, if I would have gotten into this a decade ago, where would we be? And we kind of always fall back on like, I don't know, the things that you learn in a classroom from just communicating with people, picking up on like little nuances that are important in distinguishing, like, is this deal going to work? Is this a good team?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the big thing, I was at Bryan High School.
Yeah.
And at the time we didn't have any kind of computer programming courses. I was teaching some like higher level math classes, and I was teaching some remedial, like, let's get the senior graduated math classes.
Yes.
So I'm in those classes where, 99% of the kids aren't planning on going to college. Yeah. I ask myself, what is the point of teaching like polynomial division here? It's like this.
I repeat, what is the point of teaching polynomial division? And the reason why the point is I can barely pronounce it, and there's not much point for most people.
Yeah. It was just like, this is ridiculous. Yeah. So like, we're just filling check boxes.
Yeah.
And so I kind of started to explore, and this is kind of where the entrepreneurial bug kind of kicked in a little bit, was like, what skills could these kids learn? Like, I'm seeing a ton of talent.
Yes.
Like, what could we teach? And
We're just not striking the right match.
Yeah. And it was, I got permission from my principal to kind of explore hey, if you can get kids to show up for this class, like that was, truancy was obviously a huge piece of it.
Wow. Okay.
If you can teach them something awesome and they get their math credit, like, let's try it. And
That's awesome. What an open mind from a principal, especially in a public school setting, like that's an anomaly.
It was awesome. Yeah. To get a chance to do that. And
can we drop his name to say thank you?
Yeah. Robert Aranda. He's over in the West Side district now.
Okay.
But he was awesome.
That's awesome.
And so I kind of just was floating around town of like, what are gaps? And one of the biggest gaps I kept hearing was like, we need more tech talent. I was like, well, we don't even have at the time, like, tech.
It's not even being brought out of school.
Classes.
How do you foster it?
Yeah.
Cultivate nothing. Yeah.
So I got really plugged into the the tech ecosystem. I started attending 2-3 meetups a week,
Cool.
and learning from the people and hearing gaps. And so I ended up teaching myself kind of enough code to be dangerous. And
well, I remember you saying you were going online, taking some next to free online coding classes as a professional, gaining some skills and some basic certifications that made you literally employable outside of the education sector.
That was,
this is on your own time.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
awesome.
I got my master's in curriculum development. So I ended up building out a program.
Okay.
I mapped it to a class that was on the books from the 80s that wasn't being taught, that was a math credit that had all of the standards that aligned with programming. Wow. So we essentially in the classroom, we were teaching like agile methodologies. So kids could get a math credit, but they could graduate it with like a project manager certificate. Okay. We'd teach entry level like JavaScript, Ruby on Rails to get like entry level jobs there. And then we ran the whole classroom like it was a startup. So
just for people's analogy, what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, this would be equivalent to when a geometry teacher and a woods class joins up, and now they're teaching math and geometry and woods, and they're building a house. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a lot of application stuff. It was really successful the first year. We ended up, everyone graduated, which was awesome. Cool. And enough people were interested in it that we were getting kids that, how do I be in this class without having to like be failing a bunch of my classes? So we were able to launch it. And we partnered with Dr. Love and Dr. Winter from UNO. And it was just an awesome program. They got to learn how to 3D print, 3D design within there. But I started bringing in more people from outside in the tech world to kind of see what we were doing and to get feedback on, hey, these are the kids that are graduating. They're maybe not going to college, but they have skills. Look what they learned in 2 days a week.
And when was the time? Well, first of all, let's give credit to due. Charlie, this is something that I think has glossed over. The connections you were making between applicability and education and the rigors of just a structure necessary to quote, check a box is pretty incredible, because now you're making kids, they became more inquisitive. It's your classic case of the kid who's the troublemaker and class clown, and you take him outside the classroom and put him in on a nature walk, and now he's leading the class, right? And this is a fundamental problem at times in the current education system, that you were able to be like, let's just turn this on its head. Right? And could have been a career in itself. Like, you could have went this way and say, hey, let's go to other school systems and create the same thing. Yeah. And now we're here. How many years ago did you leave to go start working remotely for out West?
Well, so I made every summer I would always reach around town and ask, hey, anybody looking for like an adult intern? And so
the movie Intern.
I had the chance to shadow some awesome, like C-suite at like PayPal, but then also in startups, work at different like dev shops and those types of things. Well, one of the dev shops that I was spent some time with in the summer, they're like, hey, you're at every meetup. Like, we see you constantly. We sponsor these. Could we like give you a couple dollars and you could come on part-time and you post photos from our account and organize this? And so I was like, this was while I was still teaching. Yeah. So I was doing that, 4 or 5 nights a week. Yeah. And Jenny was pleased. She loved it.
They've got 6 kids.
She was super supportive of that. But there was one day that I was at one of these meetups, and I was essentially delivering pizza, taking photos, and just like taking notes on what I needed to go study.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the CEOs that I was sitting by, I was like, "Hey, can I ask you a problem or ask you a question about this problem?" Because I was coding alongside the kids, trying to build out just different applications, and he was like, "Wait, you've developed this whole app while I'm having you like deliver pizzas?" He's like, "Why aren't you coding for us?" And so I was like, "Well, I'm looking for a summer job."
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I'm looking for some part-time work.
Yeah. So I ended up.
I'm delivering pizzas.
Yeah.
So that's part, you know?
So I came on kind of as a junior developer for them during the summer, and they ended up getting acquired by a cloud company, Ops Compass, who the co-founders of that are my current partners now. But Manny at the time, he was CEO, he basically challenged, he's like, "Hey, if you can get certified in a cloud, Azure, AWS, Google, get certified this summer, we could have a discussion about if you want to have a full-time job and transition out of the classroom." So I spent that summer and studied, and I got certified in all three of them. And so he was like, "All right, let's talk about this." And so then I sat down with Jenny and was like, "Hey, this
is real.
Interesting opportunity."
Yeah.
And so I ended up spending a couple years as a cloud engineer with those guys.
So going on the other side, this mental and this psyche side, you were doing this outside of school. You've got a full-time job as a dad and a husband over a larger family. And I've got to imagine, what was the change, or did it ever come up that your wife, Jenny, was seeing in you and just like seeing kind of some this resurgence of this vigor for passion for learning and curiosity and education and getting it redirected? What was that like?
Well, it was, I mean, I'm always really curious.
Yes.
Always, and that was ultimate. Like I loved teaching. I was coaching too at the time.
Yeah.
So like that was a huge time commitment, but also like just awesome to be able to work that closely with like a core group of kids for 4 years.
Yeah.
I still keep in contact with
Yeah.
a good chunk of them, but yeah, there's a point where it's like, I don't know if I can do 30 years of like quadratic formula over and over. Like I love the relationships of working with the kids, but like the challenge of there's only so many ways you can get creative about how to do that.
Well, it's the same stuff every year.
Yeah, and 4 or 5 times a day.
Yeah.
And so like those were the parts where I was starting to kind of get a little bit on the burnt out of the teaching side that I was getting excited about. Startups, about learning a new, what's this whole cloud thing all about? How do I engage there?
So you recognize that, hey, it's not a knock on the teacher's profession or teaching. It was only the fact that you were outgrowing the capacity which it was operating. You're like, hey, I'm ready for some new challenges. And short of me going to be a college professor or taking on some more AP courses as an instructor, this really isn't going to change.
Yeah.
But what you did recognize was, I am seeing a massive passion that can still continue in teaching and educating in a space that's always evolving, which is tech.
Yep. And that was the exact conversation, was tech's always evolving, the cloud's always evolving.
Yeah.
If you can learn enough, like take the skills and be able to teach in different capacities.
Yes.
We still do a lot of work. I mean, I'm heading over to Marion High School to talk about what entrepreneurship looks there. We've worked with Westside and had them out at some events. And so just figuring out ways to stay engaged there, because it's still a huge passion. Yeah.
And it looks like obviously with the nonprofit, I mean, giving back to that community, the young learner is a passion in itself too. I mean, that's something you really enjoy.
And the thing that's so interesting, so we launched an online platform for the Nebraska Startup Academy. So Nebraska Startup Academy has a handful of things that we kind of do, but one of the pillars is this online platform that we just launched like 4 or 5 weeks ago. We already have 150 founders from Nebraska on.
Wow.
There's 16 different counties from across the state that are represented. And we have like a core curriculum of, here's some things to consider. What, I said it in the classroom and I say it now, like, you don't know what you don't know.
100%.
And so if you can just help kind of, hey, don't spend a lot of time on this, but know that this is going to potentially be a roadblock, just so that when it happens, you're kind of prepped. So
definitely spreading like prairie fire. No pun intended there. But that's awesome. So you're seeing a huge engagement, and that, I feel like that is almost a hockey stick effect, that you're at 150, but you're going to be at 500 like that. Oh, yeah. Right? I mean, just in a blink of an eye. The thing that most people don't recognize, like we're closing in on our 300th meeting with Nebraska founders this year. Wow. Like, I just think at the beginning of this all, if you would have asked the general person, like, how many startups do you think there are in Nebraska? I
I don't think that number would have been anywhere near there.
I'll start 50, 150-ish.
Yeah.
You're double that.
Yeah. And that's how many, and I'm not naive enough to think that we've talked to even the majority of them. So, there's a lot of people building a lot of really cool stuff. But one thing that really caught my attention on the platform is the average age of people signing up for the platform. Like the grouping that's the highest is like 35 to 44. And then the next is like the 18 to 25.
Interesting. And you did you have an inkling of what that dynamic would look like before, or just like, we'll see what happens?
It was mainly a let's see what happens.
Yeah, let's put it out there.
I thought it might skew. One thing that I noticed different here in Silicon Valley is like here or out there, like 22, 23, 24-year-olds are all still very much young, up coding, like you mentioned earlier, like sitting in the garage type thing.
Yeah.
And you talk to a lot of 24-year-olds around here, and they're kind of thinking about like, what's my career? Like, am I getting too old I need to get married soon? Like
milestone based versus just like in it.
Well, and the responsibilities all shift. It feels like almost a decade younger here.
Yeah.
So like part of the hypothesis I have of why it's skewing older on this side is that a lot of the people that are in the program have kids that are old enough now that they can refocus on a career that they didn't do when they were 18 or 19 or 20, like we sometimes see in the Bay Area.
Wow. So, tell me something. What's a project? Well, let me back up. We're being in real estate, knowing about it somewhat about investment, commercial investment, real estate investment. The runway before profitability, from my understanding in tech versus like a more of a solid based asset, very different in terms of profitability. Can you talk a little about that? I heard you on this one podcast. I think it was the 10 podcast. You mentioned we want more people to fail. Mm-hmm. Now, I have an idea what that means, and that's a good thing for those. But I think I would really like to hear you kind of talk about that, and then also, this isn't for the faint of heart. Mm-hmm. This is something that you go through some of that a little bit.
Yeah, well, and like the mindset shift. So to run a venture capital fund, we have to get investors that believe in our vision and that believe that we'll return their capital to them.
Yeah. We got to be profitable, right? We got to win. Yeah. If we don't win, we don't get money.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, we're very capitalistic. I mean, we want to help everybody, but we're very,
but we can't
our whole goal is to return money to the investors that believe in
That's how this keeps going, right?
Yeah. We can't get bigger. And so that mindset shift is a hard one because to your point, like, real estate and a lot of people have been very successful with Warren Buffett's kind of model and, startups are totally different kind of, and it's a way to, we always kind of help people. You diversify your investment portfolio with startups. Like the outsized returns could be monumental, but it should be a small percent of your portfolio of how you're going to think about investing because 75, 80, 90% of them aren't going to work.
Right. Would you equate, I've not heard this one. I mean, somewhat almost like taking a flyer on some penny stocks and seeing what happens for some people. It's definitely about it's about an appetite. What's your appetite for investing? This isn't for everybody. Everybody's at different stages in their investment career or just beginning. Asset class wise, if you're investing in real estate, depending on the class, you really know what's going to happen if you do these things. I think there's it's a little more nebulous, a little more like less tangible on the tech side.
There are pieces of it, but there's also, just like anything that you're investing in, there's specific things we look for that tip us off that like maybe this is trending in a direction. And there's just the part that's tough is there's a lot of variables. Yeah. And then they all get weighed, differently in different situations. But the piece that, we always kind of you could 100K investment, you can only lose 100K of it.
Yeah. Right.
But the outsized returns, like the guy I was working for in Silicon Valley, Jason Calcanis, he put a 25K check into Uber when it was worth $5 million. Like it's a life-changing, when you hit over 50 for 47 billion or whatever, it's a life-changing multiple on that.
You get up and feel different the next day that happens, right? Like that's a different kind of money for those folks. And if any of you folks that are billionaires would like to come on our podcast, please don't hesitate. My contact information is below. And if any of you want to invest in any of these, any of these early onset investments that Charlie's talking about, I'm sure he'd gladly take a phone call or meeting.
Yeah. Okay. Always willing to talk about what we're doing.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And so that is it. There's a definite risk profile, but that's the kind of piece that we're looking at. But we kind of think of it as a de-risking piece as well of we de-risk by diversifying across a lot of investments.
Right.
When, we're going to make 65 investments over a 3-year period.
Yeah. In the first year, how many have you already put in?
So we've done 16 so far this year.
That's awesome. Over one a month. That's incredible.
It's been awesome.
And you guys had a really quick uptake within the first 30 to 60 days.
Yeah.
Some people that really.
One thing we wanted to make sure we did different here, people worry how to phrase this without, I don't mean it poorly, but
no, yeah.
We talk about a lot of the issues that we have here, and then we have a lot of meetings about how we could fix the issues that we have here.
They deliver.
And then we have, yes.
There's a lot of deliberation.
And so our main thing is we said, hey, if we're going to do this, we want to launch January 1st and we want to have an investment in January. We need, this is real right out of the gate.
Yes.
And then we need to make sure we keep that momentum through the next, 3 to 5 years.
Are you guys, how much does analytics play in all this? For example, on the investment side, hey, we have to analyze 10 different startups. We know it's going to take 10 slide decks before we see one we invest in. Is it like that?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not gonna say
no every 10, but
this is a great one. But
on average,
essentially, I mean, as small. I mean, if you think about it, we're closing in on 300.
Yeah.
And we've invested in 16.
Yeah. So
it's a 1 in 10.
Yeah.
1 in 20.
Yeah. Okay. So 5%. About, and the reason why I think that's really good is because we can get people just understand it when it comes to growth, it is a volume game.
Yeah.
You would not get to 16 unless you saw 300.
Yeah.
If you saw 150, he's only at 8. Right. And then all of a sudden as investors hey, we don't have the traction we're looking at.
Yep.
I think what's really cool is that how the space is evolving, but how much better you're even getting at the craft of evaluating because of the reps.
The reps are huge. And that was one thing when I was working for Jason. And that was kind of the transition I made out of the cloud. I was sitting at lunch with John, John Grange, my other partner, when I was working as a cloud engineer for him. And we saw on Twitter at the time, Jason put out a tweet hey, does anybody have a background in curriculum development with a passion for startups that wants to work directly with me to build out this innovative new program?
Did you say was this a DM?
I was sitting at lunch with John and I'm like, is he saying this to me?
This is God's.
And he was like, man, I don't want to lose you, but you figure out how to apply for that.
Yeah. Dude, really cool.
And so the program I built out for him was a program called Founder University. It was essentially top of funnel for his accelerator. It's a 12-week course to help people go from idea to first customer
launch,
to
and then it funnels back into his VC.
Yep.
And this is we're seeing we tag technology on top of this. This formula is happening across all industries. Mm-hmm. It's happening across land acquisition, asset acquisition in terms of multifamily, commercial space. It's happening in business, brick and mortar stuff. I mean, this is a model that's being used. So I know that when people read this as a podcast, as a tech podcast, this is a business podcast. This is a business interview that he's talking about high level business stuff that can be replicated and scaled.
Totally.
Right. It's awesome.
Well, and the tech piece is just in everything. I mean, of the 16 companies, and all 16 are Nebraska companies.
Dude, that's badass.
Really awesome.
That's really cool.
It's diverse across. I mean, we have we're industry agnostic, so we'll look at pretty much any kind of. So a true tech, what everyone's thinking of app, you sell
Elder Trend,
exactly.
Huddle. I mean, these all started out.
Those are exactly the type
of
things we're looking at, but we're also looking at, we made an investment into a laser workstation that essentially has the ability to engrave into a microchip to improve surface area and disperse heat.
Oh, wow.
Developed
super
here in Lincoln.
Technology. Yeah, cool.
We built an ag tech company that is leveraging data from pivots and satellites to provide better information on how farmers should irrigate.
Wow. I've just at the ag piece alone and the technology growth in terms of dealing with efficiency of livestock. And there's a gentleman that I went to high school. His name's Lee Redden. He's out in West Coast now. He's he sold this company for multi-millionaire, $1 million. And now he's like, his hobby now is racing vintage race cars. And he's 37 years old, right? But, these are those are the success stories, but it's all about the grind work on the back end too. I mean, you're seeing what we hear about in Forbes and these magazines is the tip of the iceberg as a finished product. All the work, support, this is all that's all the groundwork. That's all the early stages of cultivation. What is that? I mean, you have got to be seeing talent emerge everywhere because it's a kind of an untapped space.
Yeah. Well, what our kind of thesis on a lot of this was, the research that we saw from Invest Nebraska that really tipped us off is we kind of looked at the last $1 billion invested in Nebraska technology by stage. And there was like, I mean, I can get you the link to the actual study, but ballpark, it was about, 20 at the Series B or later. And, you take a step back in the funnel and it was 50 or 60 at the Series A or later. Take a step back and it was 150 at the seed. So you get the sense of this funnel building.
Yep.
And we looked at the pre-seed, the stage where we're at, and it was around like 45 or 50.
Right.
Now, like just the way a funnel should work, that should be at 450 or 500. And so like there was a gap there. And granted, totally understand that, friends and family rounds maybe aren't reporting all of them correctly.
Sure.
But not at a rate that would be that drastic of a difference.
Or so that would deter you from doing something where there's an opportunity.
Yeah. And both my founders are serial entrepreneurs. They've raised hundreds of millions of dollars for startups over their careers.
Awesome.
And this was a gap they've always seen. They've always, if to initially get an idea off the ground, they had to leave Nebraska to get the capital to do it. Yeah. And so from the talent perspective, our hope is we can retain a lot of the great talent here if they have no reason to go to Chicago or Kansas City or wherever.
Or recruit in for people who want a lower cost of living 100%. And have a family life and actually be able to have a work-life balance and harmonize that. I mean, that's a huge deal.
Well, so many people that leave that have the kids that then want to come back to and having opportunities to build your own thing is one thing we totally want to target.
Yes. What is something that you guys have made an assessment on? You're like, but then getting deeper into it after launch, it's like, that's not the way it is. Oh, actually, we had to pivot on that.
Like in terms of looking at different startups, or
I think just in general, you kind of do this venture. This is kind of you guys are in some uncharted territory, and you're like, oh, I'm pretty sure it's gonna be this way, and then you're like, no, we missed on that. Not necessarily financially, just like, that was wrong thinking.
I will say that one of the biggest challenge or things that I thought would maybe be a little easier, especially after being in Silicon Valley, was just the kind of lack of awareness of a lot of people of how the space works.
Yes.
Just VC kind of, I think it has a terminology in people's minds of what it is versus what it
angel really investor, is. VC. It's kind of it. Yeah, it's
and so I think
arbitrary almost.
Yeah, and trying to kind of explain even the process of like how it works. How do you get money back out? How do you like in a risk adverse state to be able to walk into a room and say like, hey, of the 65 companies, like we think 60%, 70% will absolutely just go to zero. In the model that we kind of have, and there's still a way that we can 3x your money, over the next 7 to 10 years.
That's awesome.
And so it's like explaining, just the kind of power law concept that is like, people are talking power law at, coffee in Silicon Valley. And here it's like, here's the books to read and here's the podcast to listen to get kind of an understanding. But I mean, the high level is the winners, provide the outsized returns to make up for all of the losers. So
because they're investing in a book, they're not investing in an individual.
Exactly. And so
it's a syndication essentially.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
What has been one of your favorite parts after getting into this? What have you really been like, gosh, I could just talk about this part all day.
I mean, there's a couple things. I mean, it goes back to the classroom, like the people you get to meet. I mean, getting to meet 300 people that are like super ambitious, that believe they have an idea that will change their life, the world.
That's got to leave a level you're thinking up. It's got to just
it's incredible.
Blow the lid off your own brain. Like anything's possible.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's one of the pieces of advice that Roelof Botha is head of Sequoia, and he was one of Jason's early bosses, or Jason was a scout for him.
Sequoia's here in Omaha.
The Sequoia capital of like Silicon Valley of
the big
global
one. Yeah.
Okay. They have a global presence. Roelof was the guy that put the first dollar into like YouTube.
Okay, cool.
But one of his pieces of advice he would always he gave, so he would come on quarterly to do review startups with us when we were out there, and he would always say, like, the piece of advice that I always give is ask the question, like, what if it works? He's like, no one wanted to invest in YouTube because it was impossible to think of it. And he's like, but I was like, my mindset was, what if it works? What if video could get small enough that it could be on a device? What if internet speed got fast enough that we could watch it on a computer? What if
now we're watching it live? What
if the computer was small enough that people could carry it everywhere? What if he's like, and so you have this what if it did work mentality. And so talking to these founders, it's a great kind of hopeful time of like how everyone wants to solve big problems.
Right.
So that part's really awesome.
Well, I think too, the synergy of future pacing, the synergy of collaborating about future pacing is actually an art in itself. Very few people that I would consider myself a dreamer in a sense, or a visionary versus like an integrator. I'm not the nuts and bolts guy, but finding people to talk and have conversations about that have the bandwidth that can take their brain there is not very many, right? And so, and you said you're very systems and operations oriented. Fair?
Yeah.
So like we would have very interesting conversations, I'm sure, because you're thinking about it so different than I am, but your systems and operations can't get as good as they can without the vision. I mean, that is such a kumbaya moment, if you will. So I think that's really important. I mean, we talk about the idea of we are the sum of the 5 people we hang around with most. I mean, look about how your circles have changed.
Yeah.
But how much different your thinking is.
And one of the things is we talked to startups about it, and we talked about it internally as we were putting this together, is putting a team together that fills all of these gaps. And so like John started his first startup out of his dorm at UNO and ultimately scaled to a top 5 global Microsoft hosting provider out of the dorm. And so he's technologically always thinking ahead. And so like being able to really dive deep on a lot of those pieces and kind of even see steps ahead. We have founders that will come and present to us, and he'll challenge them on like, okay, 5 years from now, like, how is this going to change? And has some insights there. Manny, our other partner, has been in the startup and corporate world for 40 years. And, he's done international stuff. He's had a company that was acquired and ultimately went public. And then we have an investment team that's just incredible with a deep background on private equity, finances.
Are a lot of your investors local too?
So, yeah. Right now they are. Our main push in 2024 is to get out and talk to some people outside of the state.
And I love the concept of investing in the Midwest.
Yep.
It's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. What do you, so that's one thing you're looking forward to is obviously growing your investor base. That means you can help more people.
Yep.
Right. But then what is some other stuff that you're starting to really get excited about too? Maybe back on the move side of things. What's there you're really liking?
I mentioned all of our investments to date are Nebraska companies. We're going to prioritize Nebraska a lot, but it's not a Nebraska problem.
No.
There's a lot of places in surrounding areas that have a similar lack of capital. Just because we're catching up. So get really excited about the idea of kind of Nebraska is really uniquely positioned to kind of be put on the, we could be an innovation center of kind of the country here. I think.
Full logistic hub.
Totally.
I mean, we're talking about fiber optic hub. I mean, we are rolling things east and west. And not only is this a drug traffic highway from east to west for whatever, but it's also an information system highway because we're running from east to west coast. Logistic hub for moving products and supplies. All this runs along the railways and the roadways. The
Fortune 300 companies that we have here, the fintechs, the insurtechs, we're one of the per capita, one of the highest cities for millionaires that have capital to put into these types of things if they can get educated on the side of it. So that is one thing on the academy side. We're going to launch in 2024 angel investing education, just so that people who have found success in other ways that maybe aren't super comfortable to raise their hand and say, I don't know what this is, just making it easily available and give them easy ways to do it.
Let's dive in a little bit to this. I mean, I talked to my sister the other day. She is 14 years older than I am. I told her about ChatGPT and she had no idea what I was talking about. Okay. First of all, I think I'll say this bold statement here. If you don't, I mean, the AI world has changed the game on almost every level. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go into a little bit of your view and usage of AI and how you're using it as a tool in your world right now.
Well, it's funny you bring this up. There was Tech Nebraska is a new program that just launched to really look at policy and innovation in tech. And so they had a conference on Tuesday, and Google was there presenting on AI. They had a couple panels talking on AI, and it's really kind of the packaging of it. Like, it's existed in some forms for decades.
Sure. Just about usability has been completely different.
Yeah, and I think the fact that it can start answering everyday questions for people makes it a lot more relatable than like automating some system that they don't necessarily care about in the same way.
Yeah.
The creativity piece of it, I think, is really interesting, how it's kind of learning in that way, but it's been around. It's going to continue to be around. I think just figuring out ways for people to accept that it's there. Like, I'm more hopeful about it than I am like doomsday about it. Like, there's just too many good things that can happen. And like, I don't know, I'm sure people are having the same conversation about like how the automobile was going to be like the worst thing, and tractors were going to end farming. And, so I mean, it's a tool to help us progress.
It's our job as the most dynamic species living to kind of get ahead of it and not let it control us.
And let it do the jobs no one wants to do, and like let us figure out other things to do.
Yeah. It'll create more opportunities.
I agree.
I think that's what Gary Vaynerchuk says. AI will create more opportunities than it will dissolve.
I agree.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, if your investors weren't investing in fintech or tech, they were investing in business startup anyways. So now they've created an entirely new sect of investment for their own to create jobs and opportunity. Man, it's crazy.
I think one thing it'll do is like, it'll create more like lifelong learners with like, there'll always be like a need for specialists in certain things, but I just, having a career that's going to be 50 years where I'm doing the same job is like, I don't think that's going to be a thing for like our kids.
Yeah. I look at what it can just do on the curriculum base. If it's able to answer questions and the way we are learning, the modality which we're learning. I mean, ultimately, the classroom has not changed for hundreds of years, and now we're going to go through. I mean, if a kid had if a person had enough gumption at age 16, would no longer need to go to high school anymore, and if they're a lifelong learner mentality and don't necessarily need the structure and they're self-paced, they don't need a high school. They don't need the physical education of a professor talking to you anymore.
Yeah.
And we've had distance learning for years, but to this capacity where you are self-teaching curriculums.
Well, and if you could put some guardrails in place, like, I mean, that's
Doogie Howser, MD. Let's
changing curriculum is so hard because there's so much red tape. And in a space like this, it's going to be impossible because by the time it gets approved, it's outdated. I mean, it's outdated by the time you submit it for approval, let alone when it gets through the approval process. So like, the turnaround process I have to speed up immensely. Like the red tape for people having to, it's just like the patent office. Patent office now has got to be, just because of AI, has got to speed up immensely. The legal system, analyzing proofs, law proofs. Are you kidding me? Nuts. Yeah. So you traveling a lot? Is it mostly out here in Omaha? A lot of Lincoln and Omaha.
Okay.
We're in Grand Island. A lot of like, we've made investments like five or six in Omaha, 5 or 6 in Lincoln. We have one from Oxford, Nebraska, Aurora, Nebraska, and Kearney, Nebraska.
Okay. Are you able to talk about these, or are all these private?
No, yeah, we talk about any.
So like, what's going on in Aurora, Nebraska? My wife's from Aurora. I'm interested.
Yeah. So John's out there. He's building a software that will help validate insurance to make healthcare providers not have to essentially send it off, wait to see if it's approved, or can do it kind of in real time. So
for healthcare side, not home auto and liabilities.
Healthcare right now.
Healthcare, okay.
But that's the thing. Like, when you're asking about kind of how we analyze things, when we talk to someone like that, it's like, okay, here's the market they're very focused on, that they understand they could get there, they could get a share.
Yeah.
But then what could happen after that?
Yeah.
And so like seeing opportunities for, okay, if they captured a good chunk of this market, what's just next?
Delivered to something else.
And so like, that's one thing that got us excited about John Building Valid was, okay, go tackle this. And his co-founder works in the space that they're going after, so knows it quite well.
It's awesome. What about in Kearney? I'm from Kearney. What's going on in Kearney?
So Nave Analytics is based out of Kearney. That's the ag the ag tech platform that does work with pivots and satellite to kind of provide data on how to more efficiently water your fields.
I mean, obviously, water is a premium and will continue to be a premium. I forget the investor or the from Big Short. Now he's making huge plays in water. It's one of his big things. I mean, this is a huge deal, especially with the change in water restriction from Colorado, and not only in the river groundwater, but also the aquifer base. So that's a huge deal. Is efficiency of water, which is fascinating. So you talk about. Usually, if you can solve big problems, you make big money, right? The bigger the problem, the bigger the paycheck, right? So that's pretty interesting. And then how much, so you were talking about kind of, as we kind of wrap this up but I mean, people are not only creating businesses, but they're becoming businesses, branding. You know, what is, with the use of social media tools and, you know, the variations of what the different titles are. So, you know, started with Facebook, MySpace, Facebook, and now we've got, then Instagram grows, and then we have, and YouTube's continued to be a behemoth and evolve. And then we have TikTok, and people are becoming their own businesses. You know, how are you seeing that play in? Because if you're the business, it's hard to scale. It's hard to invest in an individual. It's hard to grow. I mean, not everybody's Mr. Beast, right? I mean, how's that been evolving, and how have you been trying to talk about that piece for people?
Well, I think it's exactly what we were just talking about. You know, the 50-year careers may be gone, but everyone can. If you have something specific that you can offer that's valuable to people, they'll pay for it,
and we'll figure out how to monetize. We can figure out how to monetize.
You can figure out, and part of it is, I mean, we talk about this all the time too. Like, you can have a phenomenal business that doesn't have to scale, that can print money, and you can have a pretty sweet life. And so, like, that's one of the pieces from the education perspective that we talk to about people is, you know, one of the top questions we ask founders that come, it's like, do you really want to take capital from us? Because, like, this is the path it's going to put you on.
Interesting.
Because once, you know, it's to your point about the profitability.
Mom, pop shop versus going franchise.
It's like, man, if we're on your cap table and you've taken on this, like, you have different responsibilities, your milestones shift. Where if, like, I don't know, maybe a line of credit for some inventory gets you profitable and you're printing money, and you let it and you hire someone else and you do something else, or you.
I mean, it's gonna 10x you. I mean, you're talking about a launch pad, right? Like, hey, do you want to make $150,000 a year, work 30, 25 hours a week, make $250,000? Or do you want to go ahead and maybe we're going to throw you in on 50 to 60 hours a week, 70 hours a week, but we have a chance to make millions here. Like, it's just a different mindset. More money, more questions, more opportunities, more challenges, I mean, there's just a lot more of everything.
Jason would always say that, you know, the rocket fuel is awesome if you're trying to go to the moon. If you're getting on your bike, it's, like, very dangerous. And so, like, that was an analogy he would always. And so, like, from the move perspective, we're really interested in going to the moon, you know, with the rocket fuel. And so we'll help you.
You're actually planning on moving to the moon. We want to move there, and we want to feel everybody's dream to go there too.
Those are the companies.
So you and Elon will be able to maybe have a telephone wire between Mars and the moon. It's gonna be great. That's awesome. Gosh, Charlie, this has been so much fun. I think it's actually raised more questions than answers because it's such a new space for us that's been on the podcast. But I am so happy for you, man. This is great. I love it. Well, thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
No, appreciate the time.
Absolutely.
It's good to see you.